Well, John, we both got our COVID shots. Now, should we make everyone else do the same?
Well, yes, we should, but it's kind of complicated.
I'm going to have to disagree with you there, John. Welcome to CareTalk, America's home for incisive debate about healthcare business and policy. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the CEO of CareCentrix.
Well, John, I got my shot. You got your shot. Should everybody get their COVID-19 vaccination?
Well, look, everybody really should. I mean, the vast majority of vaccines that people have already in their arms, they don't have a choice. Mumps, measles, and rubella, polio. There's a lot of vaccinations that people have already got where they implicitly or their parents trusted the health care authorities to get it right. And, you know, in America, we kind of have and have made a lot of these diseases and viruses non-existent. The notion that we should be fighting it is with vaccines is just profoundly simple. But I don't know that we can actually dictate that to people. David, what do you think?
John, I think you're getting soft or staying soft just to confirm that. So, we need to get to 85% plus probably vaccination in order to get to herd immunity. I don't see it happening without a mandate. I did my part. You did your part. We don't want the variants to run wild and get after people who've already been vaccinated. I say mandate now, John.
Well, David, I think, as is typically the case, you don't bother trying to communicate your points. You just want to dictate them. So let's slow down there, big boy. How did all those mask mandates work? And did they actually build public consensus or undermine it? Even when that was kind of brain dead obvious. Let's step back a little bit. We've got an exhausted country that is looking for those green shoots of health. Maybe we kind of lean on persuasion as opposed to sort of public demands. And you might actually find, David, if we spend the time communicating with people, that we'll get to, and I don't think it's 85% plus. It's probably closer to 80% based on the most recent models. And then you got to add the number of people who are immunized with the number of people who've got the neutralizing antibodies in their bloodstream because they've had COVID. So I don't think it's an either or. I think we can get there incrementally, and that's the only way we're going to convince the disunited states of America around vaccines to actually increase the number of vaccinations. I'm not sure that dictating it's going to work.
Well, John, I'm not sure we're going to persuade anybody. I do believe, it wouldn't have made sense to have a mandate 2 months ago when there weren't enough vaccines. Now there are enough, and you can have a mandate. John, remember when we were hearing people that were complaining that they don't want the MMR vaccine and so on? And we said, well, that's because, the reason that this is happening now is because people forgot what these childhood illnesses were like. And, nobody remembers when people were, had trouble with measles and people died and or had, lifelong disabilities from that, or when they were polio and they were paralyzed from that. Well, guess what? We've got COVID right here in our face, and people are still saying that it's a nothing burger. So I think I don't need to persuade anybody, John. I just need to persuade them, you get it, or you're going to go to prison, and there you're going to get COVID.
I don't think that's going to work. First of all, David, let's step back a second. We've got these vaccines. They're incredible technologies, but we are in the emergency use authorization phase. We haven't gone through all of the it's going to happen soon. Or maybe we're at EUA, emergency use authorization plus phase. But realistically, we're not going to, there is reasonable questions. I think they're sensible about whether the vaccines have even gotten to where the FDA wants it. Having said that, these vaccines are incredibly safe. There's almost a nil chance of bad outcomes. They're being extremely carefully managed, and they're an extraordinary win for society. But I don't think you get to your end result faster by telling people that aren't likely to get the vaccine that they should or have to. I mean, what are you going to give people traffic tickets? You're going to You're going to troop them off to the overcrowded jails. I mean,
All right, John. All right, John. So usually you're like a black and white argument type guy, but I see you're willing to be drawn into the nuances. So let's get a little bit nuanced here. So
you're going to demand that people.
hold on. Hold on, John. So here's what I would say. Okay, there's some subtleties to it. And for example, you're right. It's on the EUA. So maybe people who are really low risk, like, kids, which it's not approved for anyway, but, maybe it's not time for a mandate there. But let's talk about, for example, certain professions. Okay, so nursing home staff have been some people that have been, hesitant to get the vaccines.
Oh, now you're moving the goalposts.
No, 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 John. I would say, hold on.
You can require people in healthcare institutions to get vaccinated. You can require people by employment category to get vaccinated. Now you're playing on my turf.
So, John, okay, so I would think the mandate should be for certain professions, yes. Colleges, to be a student there, it's happening. I think young students, once it's approved for them, yes, also, although the bar should be higher because they don't necessarily personally benefit as much, the kids. And then how about like a customer? Someone to come into my store, it says no mask, no service, no vax, no service.
Well, I think you have that. You can lean on if those rights of privacy and enterprise, the needs of the group, particularly in smaller scale, whether it's a cop or a teacher or a school. And I definitely think, we're definitely thinking at CareCentrix that we're not going to mandate and require vaccines as a condition of employment, but we may require it and are likely to require it as a requirement to actually come back to a workplace because you want people to feel safe. I'm just saying, I'd love a world in which everybody sensibly got vaccinated as quickly as possible. I think we got to look at the reality that Americans don't react well to global mandates. But if you increase the cost of access, whether it's work or services, or actually, honestly, access to the healthcare system, and people see that it is a condition of participation, I think you're likely to see more people get vaccinated. And I'm actually more hopeful that with more people having a good experience and more people being healthy and more data getting out there, that there's a possibility that conversation and experience will help.
John, here's one that really bothers me, and I'm hoping you can actually explain it a little bit because I'm awfully concerned and unhappy about it on its face. And that's where I saw that a very high percentage of our soldiers who were offered the vaccine said no. Something like a third said no, depending on the branch.
Crazy.
And I don't get it. And I think that that's, to me, if anything, it's a failure of leadership. And it just makes me wonder about, first of all, how did this happen? And secondly, I mean, do we have the same view? Like, if we're going to have a military operation, do we think it's okay? A third of people think, well, gee, I don't think that's an enemy. I mean, what's the story?
I can't explain the profound lack of leadership and clarity around this. It should be a requirement, David. It may have something to do with the EUA stuff, but as a practical matter, having served in the uniform, you're ordered to do stuff, you do it. And one of the things that will kind of profoundly affect our force posture and undermine the resilience of our military is if we permit people to pick and choose whether they are putting their health at risk, because it's not just their individual health, although that's dangerous because they are part of a team that requires their help, the United States military, but it puts other people's health at risk. Look, when people get sick, we all pay for it. When people get sick in the military, particularly of a viral illness, they're at risk of making a bunch of other people sick. So no, I think I'm with you on that one. That just strikes me as dumb.
I hope that's going to be corrected. Now, John, one thing I think that we should go back to some nuances that you're describing before, which is that there's a pretty high percentage of people that want the vaccine, lined up for it. We've seen it, in many states. Then there's some group that's really against it, but there's a bunch of people in the middle that are they would get it. It just has to be convenient. They have to have the right messaging around it. They have to not worry they're going to miss a day of work if they, have side effects. Like I wasn't feeling well. I was tired, that is, feeling fine, but tired after my vaccine. And if I had to worry about an hourly job, I might be concerned about that. So I think there's a role to be played to making it easier to do it. And John, maybe it's the same thing. We should take all the people that have been focused on how to prevent people from voting and get them to turn their mind in the other direction and say, well, I'll do all the opposite things and get people to be vaccinated easily.
Well, I think it goes back, David, to the fact that we've got kind of a broken and incomplete public health infrastructure. But one of the things I think that both the Trump administration and the Biden administration have gotten right is by pushing it out through pharmacies, they're pushing it out through the private sector access point to the healthcare system that's got the greatest reach in the country with thousands and thousands of pharmacies. And we got a lot of actually a pretty big excess of pharmacies in the U.S. And now we can actually put them to good use.
John, I know we don't like to talk about, the next pandemic, although I think we may have a guest soon on our show to discuss that. Stay tuned, listeners. But I think this pandemic, last one was about 100 years ago. Now, my concern is that what's happening, these are like these 100 years.
That's not true. That's not true. There was a Hong Kong flu in the 60s. There have been a number of close calls on pandemics. The last big one was in 1918, but there have been some viral epidemics that were contained, but that harmed and killed many people between now and we don't tend to track it because it's not common. It will likely become a lot more common as the zoonotic viruses, those viruses that jump species. The ones, do you know what that word means?
John, the thing is here, actually, my first question was zoonotic is like, does that have 3 O's in a row or 4? That's what I'm unsure about.
As we overpopulate the earth and people are traveling a lot more and we have more of a convergence of travel and people going into living in previously uninhabited habitats, you're going to see more of them. I think actually, COVID SARS 3. This is a wave that we will revisit.
Okay. Well, John, you were agreeing with my first point, which is that I was going to say it's like those 100-year rainstorms that floods now we have every 5 years. So what precedent, getting back to our point about vaccine mandates, I mean, what do we need to be thinking about, in terms of having a mandate or not about here? What does that mean for the future? And I think the possibility that, this isn't even the big one, things that may be even more aggressive in terms of infectiousness and how deadly they may be.
I just think it builds on the point that I think that Jason Kelly was talking about last week on our previous CareTalk, where we need to have a different level of infrastructure around our biological vulnerability. Now, here's the good news: we've got a vaccine. We're talking about the back and forth about whether you mandate it, but the reality is it works and it's safe, and we actually created the design for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine within 48 days of actually unpacking the genetic code of this particular virus. So I think we have the technologies to solve for it. But I think what you're going to see is the COVID shot will be an annual shot or an annual booster. And but what I worry about is that early warning system of testing that failed so badly at the beginning part of this pandemic, and that it's unclear whether we're going to invest in the infrastructure so that we can find it and contain it. Because if we can find and contain these next and new viruses, the current variants, if we could contain them, we'd be a lot less dangerous to society and to people.
Well, John, sign me up for that booster club, at least for COVID, but I hope that they nip these other ones in the bud so I don't have that. I think I've had just about enough for today, John. So let's say that's it for this week's edition of Care Talk. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the CEO of CareCentrix. If you liked what you heard or you didn't, please tell us what you think and subscribe.